last night was big for Republicans in the race for governor of Virginia. Republican Glenn Youngkin won, beating out former Governor Terry McAuliffe. But in New Jersey, the race for governor is still too close to call at the time of our taping. It's like down to hundreds at this point with New Jersey, just so you know. Here's the deal. If both of these states go for Republicans, that's a really big upset because both states have been reliably blue. So this was an indictment of President Biden and his agenda, or was it? A lot of people saying, woo, woo, red alarm bells, fire alarm bells, panic time.
Lights or bells?
Yeah,
both,
that sounds
guys.
like a party, actually.
I'm just saying,
yeah,
Virginia
I be there.
It sounds great, but Virginia was won by Biden by 10 points. This time, white women took it by 15 points to the Republicans. That shows you a sleepy base, not interested. Even Obama went out and spoke. No one came out to vote.
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, reliably Democrat, plus you add political fatigue.
Yes.
And the idea that, well, if this is the way it's always been, this is the way it'll always be. So, yeah, when people aren't going out to vote, I'm sure next time around there's going to be some incentive to do so.
Right. But when Biden, to me, and I hate to say this, feels not exciting. He's not revving the base. He's not energizing the party to get up and go. You got to get people to get up their couches and vote.
Yeah, some people don't want that in their politicians, though. Like, I don't need my president to be giving me the Rudy halftime speech. I don't need to be excited. I need for you to handle your business so I don't have to think about it. And I think that's where a lot of people were tired with Trump. Was like, a lot of people were like, I don't want to know who the attorney general is. I don't. I have 3 kids. I have 4 jobs. And I think a lot of times when we start talking about our politicians, not only do we have to put them in office, but then we feel like we have to constantly monitor them because they go off the rails all the time. And I think a lot of people like myself are frustrated. I voted yesterday in the midterms, and I saw the numbers at the time that I voted. I think 30% of the population here in Colorado voted. So when you start talking about motivated bases, the people that show up and yell at people at school board meetings and yell a lot and are on Facebook and they block their niece, those people are out voting in the midterm. So we're going to see a swing towards what they think because the other adults in the village are busy.
Well, you mentioned like motivating people. I like that, like halftime speech type of guy or woman or whatever it may be. I like to be inspired, right? On the other side, man, I don't want my president falling asleep at summit meetings, okay? And we don't bring that up a lot because it gets a little taboo to talk about. But I think it's so...
This is the place to talk about it.
Exactly.
Please.
Exactly, right? So when we look at the media, we have to remember that it's 10% of people making 90% of the content. There is no like back and forth conversation. That's not what social media is for. This is what it's for, right? My president fell asleep. I want to talk about that a little bit. But if you say that, you're automatically labeled a Trumper and the labels start falling on you, right? So it's hard to have an honest conversation about what's going on in America without getting labels thrown on top of you. So I think that's where we're at. And I think some of the voting that you saw is some of the pushback from that, in my opinion.
A reflection of that.
That's interesting.
I think that's really interesting. Now, a lot of parents in Virginia, parents listen up, are saying the governor's race actually came down to education and a parent's right to have a say over what's being taught in schools. And more specifically, whether critical race theory, you might have heard that, should be taught. So what does that term mean? You might have heard of it, but you don't know what it means. This is the gist of it. Critical race theory is a way of thinking about America's history through the lens of racism. So the question is, should parents have a say in what's being taught in schools? And this is a huge debate because if you don't know parental rights, that phrase has become another "let's go Brandon," a code for we don't want critical race theory. And that's what won him the election.
How are you going to take over parental rights? I mean, come on. Let's be real, okay? The critical race theory, obviously, our memories are so short because remember what we were talking about this time last year, how parents were at home with their kids and they were going to school, and a lot of parents were complaining that they were unable to help their children with their work past like the 3rd or 4th grade. Now parents want to be in charge of the curriculum. Is that what we're talking about here? Critical race theory contextualizes every aspect of what has happened in this country. When I was in school, I went to quite a few predominantly white schools, and no one was concerned about my feelings every February February when we watched the same video over and over, and I had 28 eyes staring at me to see how I was going to react. So the idea that so much of this is being like held from our children because they can't handle it. Have you spoken to a 12-year-old lately?
Right.
It's impressive what they can handle.
Al, you have a 12-year-old, don't you?
Yeah, 13 and 14, and it's so interesting. And Jeff, I wanted to hear your thoughts on critical race theory, but yes, 12 and 13-year-olds are way ahead of where we were. They're not having this conversation. They had this conversation like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, man. We were talking a little bit before the show. I don't know the definition of critical race theory, okay? It's such a taboo word and subject to get into. I'm all for expanding education and learning about the world
context.
and our own history here in America. I think that's cool. I think I would have got along better if I knew the world the way it was, right?
Exactly.
The way it was. I think back then we didn't think we'd have the tools we have now. Now the world is so small. We could get a picture of anywhere in the world. We could talk to anyone in the world, right? I didn't know Pol Pot. I didn't know Khmer Rouge when I was going to school. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't pay attention. I didn't know till I got to Cambodia. I think it's great to learn about the world, but also our very own history that happened in America. I don't understand how that correlates into
The other-
a bad
Because there's a shame, Jeff, and I think that
That's what I'm not understanding.
That it bleeds over into not just critical race theory, but when we talk, I told you I really got into history in the last 3 or 4 years because it's so fascinating,
It is.
and you realize you've been deprived of this. But like when you look at like decisions that were made and horrible things that happened, that either happened in this country or other countries, we just get this little snapshot, or you just don't learn at all. All you learn is Betsy Ross and somebody couldn't tell a lie and somebody had wooden teeth, and then they kick you out of history class.
But the other side feels like they don't, and I'm not saying this is how I feel, the other side feels like if you teach critical race theory, then you are teaching your kids that their ancestors
But they don't teach that. They usually only teach that in law
racist.
schools.
Right. And
so
it's
like
a
we shouldn't be
collegiate-
talking about this anyway.
Exactly. So
It's
that's
not
the
a
other
thing.
side. So it's a really complex conversation, and I know we can have a longer conversation about it, but it's what I think won the election, so I'm glad that we're bringing it up and talking about
But
it.
would it be cool if, like, my kids learn about that in school, and Al, you come over and you're like, hey, Al, I learned a little bit about African American history today, and you guys can have like a cool, intelligent conversation with a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old?
Yes, Jeff.
It
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying? I don't understand how
Absolutely.
it's like turned into a bad thing. I know this is very controversial, but again, what do I know? Lindsey Graham is a man.